Hi everyone. You guys have probably heard or known already from our previous podcast. Rakhi and Kiana have introduced us, but to formally introduce you guys into this episode, I am Rotondwa, and the lovely person sitting next to me is
Anuschke, and we'll be introducing the topic at hand, vernacular spaces and the stories they tell in South African context, and the stories that we can tell as architects and students from the art form.
So we got the most amazing opportunity to just have an open discussion, or rather we'll have a discussion where an architect share his thoughts about vernacular spaces and the stories they tell. We got, I like to call him a hidden gem, a gold mine. He's under MMA studio design. When you hear MMA, you think of Mpeti. But we've got Lemaseya Khama, and he's an architect and an artist that is not in the limelight in comparison to his colleagues, and that is what makes us very excited about the conversations that we're about to share with you all. I want to take you back to 2014.
2014.
Yes.
Okay.
For those who don't know, who would be listening to the podcast, obviously, who don't know what I'm about to dive into, you were a curator for the South African Pavilion in 2014, which is not an easy find.
No.
At all.
Okay.
So how I found that is really miraculous on its own. Okay. For those who don't know what the South African Pavilion is, basically, the South African Pavilion forms part of the Venice Bianlee. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly.
Biennale, it's fine.
Biennale.
Yeah,
okay.
it's language. It's Italian. I don't know why they must add that, but yes. Biennale.
And the Venice Biennale is basically the oldest, the most prestigious art and architecture exhibition in the world.
Yes.
Over 60 countries participate in this exhibition, and they promote international exposure for artists and architects alike.
Yes.
And so, because you are a curator, which is a very big position to hold, you were a team of 2, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes.
Now, can you please just share a brief description of what that exhibition was? Because it's nothing on what it was, what it encompassed, it's just a title, and that's it. And I think it's really weird.
Okay. 2014 represented 100 years in modernism in architecture. So what the Biennale at the time mandated on all the exhibits, on all the exhibitionists, that they wanted us to express a view on how modernism has been for these 100 years. To understand the other. The other here, to me, I'm saying Clyde.
Right.
It's a need to understand the other, understand what makes them tick, what they know, what is it they appreciate about the things that they do. And if you translate that into form, I swear to you, it's the most beautiful thing when you see the reaction on the other side. Because it's almost like these people are seeing themselves in inanimate product. It's a space that speaks to them.
Right.
Literally, it's a space that speaks to them. You know? Yeah.
Okay, so you speak a lot about making sure that you understand your client, or rather
The other.
The other.
The other.
You worked in collaboration with curating that exhibition. How difficult did you find it trying to mediate between modernism and making sure that the vernacular of the stories that you're trying to tell are being heard? Because at the time, I don't think vernacular was seen as the most elegant form of expression.
It's interesting because we expressed the vernacular in terms of absence.
Okay.
Because we encountered the reality of there not being a comparable monument to the Voltrekker example.
Okay.
So if I looked at the Voltrekker monument and said, let's just understand it as a piece of art, as a piece of building in its scale that is placed in a particular point. All right? And at the point where its space is also allowed to interact with the stella, so the moon in its axis and at its particular zenith is able to actually go through the structure. So somebody thought through it. Somebody thought the language that this thing should be expressed as. Okay? Yes, the language is borrowed in all manner of different places, which explains the issue of people having traveled around the world and gathered these things. But then it also gets crystallized. You can see the different attempts of trying to define what would be the language that expresses Afrikanerness. But in the middle of all of that is also a careful telling of stories that when you looked at it, the discovery was that here are people who are telling a story about themselves, but also encountering the fact that to tell a story about themselves, they also have to tell a story about others that are also represented and reflected within that monument. You understand? Okay.
It's from Andrea Zemboni, and she wrote, or he wrote that.
He.
It's a he. You know? Okay.
He worked for Domus Architecture.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. The art of the pavilion is a space where static images of the South African city today are layered with the faces of young people from the first post-apartheid generation who describe their personal perception of this ambiguous and complex stratification of the cities in which they live.
What encouraged you to use the perceptions of the post-apartheid generation in the exhibition?
Two reasons. One, an aspect of what we've just said that says, if we are to save the architectural discourse, we need to listen a lot more to people other than just ourselves. That voice, the things that we are doing are more than just ourselves. So I'm not going to do a fancy squiggle and then it translates into a building and I say, that's it. That's the best architecture. So people are going to interact with this. And I'm saying, if we are saying there is a death in terms of architectural expression in the country, part of it is because we are not listening to people.
Okay.
That's it. Part of it is that we're not listening to people.
Okay.
So when you listen to the young, vibrant minds, you can see energy. There's so much energy. Oh, there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of self-expression. It's a self-expression that I wish could be underpinned by, call it a cultural understanding. You know, people knowing things about how their pasts are. And they can place it in a context. And that context is not necessarily looked at in shame or looked at with disdain. You know, it's just, this is how these people lived. They have relevance as part of my makeup as a person. And this is how I am now translating it moving forward. You know. So young musicians can listen to both Hugh Masekela and Miles Davis all in one go. And then create a new form of music. They are not necessarily saying, Hugh Masekela didn't know how to blow his trumpet. You can't say that.
You can't.
Because he did. He's acknowledged across the board. You understand? And Miles Davis is Miles Davis. It's international. The other things. But Miles Davis endeavored to create a new music. Right. He endeavored to create a new music. I don't think Hugh thought about it, but Hugh was part of a new music that is part of South Africa.
A new era.
It's a new era. It's a new era. And my discussion then that says, in the idea of creating an identity, a South African identity in architecture, all right, the musicians have created a space, all right? Young people are engaging with it left, right, and center, all right? And they are able to translate for themselves these different things that are before.
Found it difficult trying to research for this topic a bit. Because the first thing I think we also realized together in researching, the first thing when you Google vernacular architecture in South Africa,
Mm.
first thing that pops up is either Cape Dutch
Mm.
architecture or the typical mud house with a Dutch roof. And
In short, there is no modern expression of what vernacular is.
no, especially in the South African context, to a point where I don't want to say it's very upsetting, but it's a disappointment because we're growing up in a space where we've got things like Spitori
Mm.
that isn't an official language,
Yeah,
but
it's a
it's a
made-up
way
language.
of expression.
It's a made-up language, yes. It is. I hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
And so that alone, like Spitori, it comes with this culture of the Kavela and, you know, a certain way of dressing, walking, talking.
Mm.
And it's not presented or represented
Mm.
in any way or form. I can't walk outside and be like, yeah, Spitori. Unless you hear someone say, oh, I'm from Pretoria, then they're like, oh, okay, you know how to speak this way of speaking.
Mm.
In that way, how do you think not just those born in the era of apartheid, but us as well, can come to a place where we learn to represent vernacular architecture?
Sure.
Because that's not existent. It's not existing right now.
It isn't there. There's one worse. The things that represent the traditional stuff in the built form, that have fewer and fewer and fewer. Okay. Interesting enough, if you go to heritage, the Heritage Society, and try and understand from them around what it is that they can tell you to classify a particular construct as a heritage element or not. Almost all of them, those expressions of heritage do not speak to anything that is vernacular, and I'm using the word colloquially here. Vernacular here meaning something that is other than influenced by European expression.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So even the idea of trying to preserve, you almost have to operate outside yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for me to preserve an old Dutch building because there's laws of how to do that. But if I was to try and preserve a hut, I wouldn't be able to do that because I can't. There's no basis to do that. There's no expression, so I have to now develop new laws of how to do that.
Or cow dung flooring, polishing.
Yes. All of that. Yes. But here's where it is. It sits as part of memory of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
It's the act of laying down the floor that now has become, call it a hope, you know. So when you listen to the works that Kere does, not necessarily what it ends up looking at, all right, but the process of building up,
Of becoming.
yeah, those things becoming, that act of doing it, he taps into the idea of how best do I lay this floor? You know, so this floor is not tiles with concrete because where I'm building, this is too expensive. I can't do this. But there's a need for a floor. So somebody says, yeah, but we use earth. So how best do I lay this earth? So the act of reenacting the making of the floor has actually resulted in there being a discourse, a teaching of how getting people to learn again how to do these floors. It's also not just learning how to do these floors. He had to act in a manner of somehow getting these people to love again to do these floors okay? Because they could see those floors being done in their own places, as in their own huts. But when you then say, I'm going to do a modern house, those things does not belong here. So the tiles
You're
need to
modern,
be,
you don't get
yeah, that's it. So the idea of an expression of being advanced, it is totally dissociated from vernacular. That's one of the sad things around. Yes. Now,
Thank you for listening in. That's the end of our podcast.
We love you and see you later. Bye.
Bye.